Hey everyone, we're going to start in about a minute. We are just waiting for everyone to join and then we'll start. Okay, cool. Hi everyone, are you guys able to hear me? Just drop a quick yes or no in the chat. Everyone, how's everyone? How's everyone doing? Hi everyone, am I audible? Uh, yeah, Vijit, like actually discussed with the team regarding your request also, and I read that thread as well. So the thing was that uh, what is happening is that like we can actually make sure that we are only doing 3 classes, but the problem is that uh, with Spring Security specifically, the overall content is kind of like very complex. Okay. And the thing is that in 3 hours, if you will impart too much information in 3 hours, then it also becomes slightly more complex to absorb as well. Okay. So that's why what I have planned this in this particular week is that in case, let's say, for example, the Wednesday's class is going to be independent. Like you can attend that class on Wednesday, you can attend that class like later also. It's not going to have any intersection altogether with any particular part because that's testing. Testing is generally altogether independent. It doesn't have much of a overlap with the rest of the things. Like even if you don't know Spring concepts, still Java testing still remains same. For example, whatever testing framework we are going to use, that was the same testing framework we used to use in Google as well, where we didn't use Spring Boot. We used to have something similar to Spring Boot, but not exactly Spring Boot. Are you able to get this point? So that is the thing that we are actually kind of like trying to do. Otherwise, what will happen is 3 hours for Spring Security will be too much. And then there will be some like spillover for the next week, and then it will kind of like stretch out. That is the problem. So the Wednesday's class, don't worry on the Wednesday's class. And in fact, in today's class content also, things are like from here slightly the things are going to become slightly more easier. But this was specifically for Spring Spec Security that we discussed that we should do it in this particular way only. Are you able to get this point? Rest of the people, am I audible to everyone? Guys, please just reply with a yes or no in the chat, guys. Yes, Abhijit. That's why I made sure like till the time before Spring Security, whatever we discussed, that was enough to actually implement things around the Quora project. That's why I gave you guys enough time for the Quora project. And like, see, one thing that I always believe is one definitely thing for sure that doesn't matter how much time you're going to get, things will probably expand altogether only. There will be definitely some people who might not have yet submitted the Quora project altogether. We are still reviewing the project, but there will be still people with 3 weeks now, because now it's almost 3 weeks now. So with 3 weeks almost done, then also they won't be able to complete it. So it's about like 1 or 2 week effort. Again, that is specifically for Spring Security. Because what I realized was like when we started with Spring Boot, some people were having basic concept around or basic context around things with Spring Boot. But the moment Spring Security came up, it was difficult for most of the people, because what I realized is that most of the time in companies also Spring Security and things around security part, generally you don't get to play with. Generally it happens. Like in fact in Microsoft, if I come up, as of now, it's been like on 23rd. Today I completed my 3 months. I don't know how auth works in particular services of mine. I know where to get token from, where to set the token to, but internal mechanism of my service, I don't know, because that's already set up, right? So there will be very less chance that you will get to work on auth, and that makes it slightly more complex as well. Okay. So that is, again, as I mentioned, that's the special case for Spring Security. And why I kept today's class, because I wanted to make sure that we don't lose the grip altogether. Otherwise, a 5 day break will lose the momentum around Spring Security. So I thought that maybe we can wrap it in one shot, one go, kind of like that. Is this point making sense? Okay, cool. So let me share my screen, guys. Let me share my screen. Let me know if you guys are able to see my shared screen, everyone. Okay. Before we start, first of all, any questions from anyone? First of all, any questions from anyone? Guys, anyone having any questions, feel free to ask with whatever we discussed in the last class, because I believe the last class was the one of the most complex ones if I compare with the rest of the Spring Security part. Anybody having any questions, feel free to ask. We wrote this particular API around login yesterday, remember? And I gave you guys a homework also to think about how will you validate the request coming from the auth servers and everything. So anybody having any questions? No questions as of now? Anybody has any questions, guys? Please feel free to ask. Satvik, you can have some assumptions that we have actually completed creation of JWT token and sending it as a cookie in the response from signing. Now we are going to have the validation part, that now the user is authenticated. Now user wants to access some resource. Okay, cool. Anybody give a thought around the validation part? For login in Google, you have to implement a lot of things around OAuth with Google. There will be some significant changes that you have to do, Pawan. You can check some docs, or Let's see if we have time at the end of the course. I can even cover that. I have once implemented OAuth with Google. It was quite some time back. String security has changed, but I believe the internal concept still remains same. I need to figure out the API part. But if at the end we have some time, we can probably check it, or maybe I can share some resources on that. Okay. But again, it's there are two things. One, if the Google APIs have changed or not. Second, if the Spring Security configuration APIs have changed or not. That's the only two things that's gonna actually make the overall difference altogether. Okay. Now, guys, now we have a auth service. Now we want to make sure that the other microservices that we are going to have are able to validate the request. That if a request is coming up, then is that request coming up from an authenticated user or not? How we will be able to do that? Anyone having any ideas? By introducing row calls this microservice. Very good, Satvik. Satvik is thinking in the right direction. That probably we might want to call this particular microservice. Yes or no, guys? Yes or no, guys? Remember, we saw an architecture. One second. Da-da-da. So, if you remember, we actually saw an architecture where uh, just a minute. Uh, Let me draw it once more. Okay. So now what's going to happen is that let's say let's say you are having this auth microservice. Okay. You are having this auth service, and then let's say in our app we are also going to have a booking service. Remember, we are going to have a booking service as well. Okay. And let's say we are going to have a client. We are going to have a, let's say, client. Okay, cool. Now, what is will happen is that client will try to make a request to the booking service. Now, booking service needs to make sure that whether client is authenticated or not. So what booking service will do? Booking service will make a request to the auth service. Then auth service will tell the booking service whether the user is authenticated or not. And then based on this response, booking service is either going to process the request or send unauthorized. Now, in order to for this particular thing to happen, the client has to send the JWT token in the request. Okay. Client has to send the JWT token in the request. And then this booking service is going to forward this JWT token to the auth service. And then auth service is going to read this token, process this token, and based on that, give the response to the booking service that whether the token is coming from a valid user or not. How many of you guys are able to get this point? Say a yes or no in the chat. Is this point making sense what I'm trying to convey here? Now, for this particular thing to happen, what are the changes do you guys propose inside our current microservice? What are the changes that you guys propose in the current microservice? Anyone? Anyone, what changes do you guys propose in the auth service? No, booking service should not handle the JWT token. They should just directly pass it to the auth service. Can I say that? Yes, but it should accept the input. Yes. So in the request, whatever JWT token is coming up, booking service should also accept that. That's correct. Guys, what changes do you propose for this particular architecture to work? Everyone. I want you guys to think. It should not be more like it should not be very difficult to think about it. Guys, okay, let me ask you a simpler question. In the auth service, do we need to introduce any more APIs? Do we need to introduce any more APIs? Yes, we might have to introduce an API in the auth service. Can I say that, guys? We might have to introduce an API in the auth service that can actually take the request and validate it. Yes or no? Now, a question that should come to your mind is that how this client is going to send the JWT token to the booking service. What are the ways in which do you guys expect the client to send the JWT token to the booking service? Anyone? Okay, so few people are saying header, few people are saying HTTP only cookie. What do you guys think should be our final solution? So there are two ways. One way is that this JWT token can come in the request headers. That's also a good way. The other way can be that this JWT token can come in the same HTTP only cookie altogether. How many of you guys are able to get the point that I'm trying to say here? Is this point making sense? Right? That either the JWT token can come in the header or the JWT token can come in the same HTTP only cookie kind of a structure. Yes or no? But do you remember the problems with it? Okay, now let's ask it like this. Do you guys see any challenge? Do you guys see any challenge in setting it as a header? If we are sending the response as HTTP only cookie? Anyone can misuse it. There is a problem that might happen even before that. There might be a problem that can happen even before that. Anyone? Cross domain cookie is difficult. Again, there might be a problem that can happen even before all of that. Guys, you're sending a response as an HTTP only cookie, and you want to send the next request from the client as a header. Length of the header will be too long? I don't think so. That should not be a problem. Like that should not restrict us to do anything. Like you can encode it, right? You can encode it in shorter forms. Sensitive data. We already send a lot of sensitive data, Satvik, in the HTTP request, right? For example, when you sign in, you send your email and password. So the handling of sensitive data eventually happens through what? Happens through HTTPS. Can I say that? So that should not be a problem for us. Can I say that? Any other problem? Okay, what is the feature of HTTP only cookie? We talked about the main feature of HTTP only cookie, right? What is the main feature of HTTP only cookie, guys? Not accessible at the client side. Very good. Guys, the problem is that HTTP only cookie will not be accessible on the client side JavaScript. Can I say that? The HTTP only cookie will not be accessible on the client side JavaScript. Yes or no, everyone? If it will not be accessible on the client side JavaScript, then you will not be able to fetch it from JavaScript. If you will not be able to fetch it from JavaScript, how will you set it in the header? Can I say that? How will you eventually set it in the header? Is this point making sense to all of you? What I'm trying to convey here? How many of you guys got this point? That in order to set it in the headers, we need to get it in a plain fashion. Yes or no? Right? Maybe directly in the response or in the response header, like some way we want to access it, right? Some way we should be able to access it. Yes or no? And if you're not able to access it, then how will you set it in the header? How will you actually set it in the header? So what is the other solution that we are left with? What is the other solution that we are left with, guys? In that case, we will expect that the cookie should be sent as, again, Abhijit is saying headers. Abhijit, again, the same problem. If you are returning the cookie, if you're returning the JWT token in the form of an HTTP only cookie, that means it will not be accessible on the client side. Can I say that? If it will not be able to accessible on the client side, how will you actually fetch it from the JavaScript and then move it to your request header? Are you able to get my point, what I'm trying to say? Is that point making sense? So guys, in that case, do you think that we might have to send it again in the form of a cookie only? What do you guys suggest? How many of you guys agree with the fact that we might have to send it in the form of an HTTP only cookie only? Or let's say from the client request, we might have to send it in the form of a cookie only? Yes or no? Because do you remember one more feature of HTTP only cookie? That it's accessible on the server side. It's accessible on the server side. Can I say that? Okay. Now, in that case, the question comes to the point that now we will be writing one more API. In that particular API, we have to access our incoming cookies. Anybody who can tell me how can you access your incoming cookies? if you remember, we were able to access the response cookie using HTTP servlet response. Now I want you guys to think, how can you access your request cookies? What do you think should work here? What do you think should work here? HTTP servlet request. Are you guys able to get this point? Say a yes or no in the chat. Everyone. Okay. So there is an object called as HTTP servlet request. HTTP servlet request. This is going to have access to the whole incoming request object. If you want to have the access to the whole incoming request object, you can get that. If you are coming from the world of Node.js, then you might have heard about Express.js having a request in the response parameter in every controller function. Have you ever heard about it? Remember? Okay. Same kind of a thing. HTTP servlet response and HTTP servlet request actually provides us. Are you able to get this point, guys? Drop a quick yes or no in the chat. Okay. Anyone who who doesn't have any context around Node.js? Anybody who doesn't have any context around Node.js? Okay, Satvik says he doesn't have. So for example, let me show you. If you go to Express.js documentation, Express.js is a micro framework for Node.js. Just like how we have Spring Boot, it's not as big as Spring Boot. It's for Node.js. It's a micro framework. So for example, let me show you one interesting thing. So if let's say you want to have a GET request on the root route, can you see there is a callback method that we are passing here? Can you see that? Okay. And do you see the parameters of this callback function? Do you see the parameters of the request and response? What is this request and response? This is the whole HTTP request object and the response object. Are you able to get this point? This is the whole HTTP request that is incoming and the HTTP response that is outgoing. Okay. In a similar way, if you just mention a HTTP servlet request here in the arguments of a controller function, then inside the controller, you will be having the access to the whole request object and the whole response object. That means you can actually read the headers, you can read the cookie, you can do a lot of things directly from here. Are you able to get this point? But if client is unable to access the cookie, how it will make the request? So Ankan, browser has that cookie, but, or let's say the client side has that cookie. It's just that you cannot actually like access that cookie using JavaScript. The moment you send the cookie back from the same client, if you will make the further set of requests, you will be having that cookie in the request already set. Are you able to get this point? Are you able to get this point? Say yes or no in the chat. Everyone, are you able to understand how we are going to pass the JWT token now? Are you guys able to understand how we are able to pass the JWT token? Okay. Now, what I want you guys to do is, I want you guys to write a brand new controller method. Inside this controller method, maybe you can have a /validate method. You should expect a HTTP servlet request object and see if we are able to see the cookie or not. You guys have exactly 10 minutes to do this. In the class, I want you guys to do it. If you have not written the auth service yourself as of now, you can just clone my auth service, but I still want everybody of you to actually try this hands-on. Okay. Is that task clear to everyone? Is the task clear to everyone? Say yes or no in the chat. Okay, Abhijit, I'm saying that now what I want you guys to do is, now we have to make an API in the auth service. I want you guys to start writing that API. I want you guys to start writing that API. And the first step in that API should be to access the cookie from the HTTP servlet request. Okay. Now, because you have enough context about basic controllers, you have context about basic Spring security, I believe you guys are in a good shape to try hands-on directly on this particular API. Make sense? Is the task clear? So what I expect you guys to do is to write a new /validate API that at least fetches the JWT token. That at least fetches the JWT token. Make sense? Then we will see how we can validate. Because if you remember, in the JWT service, we already have a validate method. If you remember, validate token method. Right? Remember? So we can do the validation. The only thing is, let's see if we are able to fetch the token or not. Got it, guys? I can't this function on GitHub. How come? The validate function, Satvik. Satvik, the validate function. Did I push the code? 1 second. Let me see. Did I push the code or not? Git status. Oh, I have some code unpushed. I'll just quickly push it. Git commit -m auth added. There we go. You guys can check it out now. Just check out now, guys. Guys, it should be a pretty simple, plain HTTP request that we have to do. At least set up a basic controller. That's the bare minimum I'm expecting. Array of cookie is coming. Very good. Akash, what about rest of the people? What about rest of the people, guys? Okay. So let's start. So first of all, remember in the last class, we were playing around with your HTTP only cookie. In the browser, we were not able to access any cookie. I'm not sure about the reason why. Remember that, everyone? Do you guys remember in the last class, we were playing around with HTTP only cookie? Now let's try to see if we are able to actually do these things. So what I did is I prepared a small React project, a very simple one code file based React project. Okay, I can share this with you guys separately. Can you see everyone? I'm not sure how many of you guys know about React. You can say that it's a simple front end library that can help us to do things in a more graceful way. Okay, it empowers single page applications and everything. But overall, if I show you what this app actually does, is that, can you see? I have a simple HTML form where I have feeded the email and the password, and there is a sign in button. It will send a request. If you carefully see, it makes a similar kind of a fetch request. Remember that I was doing in the last class. Okay, if it is a post request, and in the request body, it sends an email ID and a password. This email ID is this email and this particular password. Make sense? And when the response actually comes up, what it does is it tries to fetch the corresponding cookie. Are you able to get this point? It tries to fetch the corresponding cookie for JWT token. See this, everyone? Are you guys able to see this code? Okay. And then sets that particular cookie. So if the cookie will be set, we will see that here. We will actually see that here on the browser. Okay. In case the cookie will not be set, then we will see some kind of an error message altogether. Make sense, guys? Make sense? So let's do one thing. You can see this is our server. This is our server. I will make the HTTP only cookie to false. I will make the HTTP only cookie to false. Okay. Now let's run the server. Okay. Now, if I open the console, inspect console, you can see everything is clean. Everything is clean. Okay. I'll just refresh also, just in case. Okay. And now, this is the email. This is the password. Let's click on sign in. The moment I click on sign in, okay. Now, can you see there is a course error now coming up? Can you see there is a course error coming up? Can you see this? There is a CORS error coming up. Everyone. But didn't we resolve the CORS error in the last particular class? Remember? So we have to do a few things, a few changes there. Okay. So for example, if you currently come up and if you go to Spring Security, okay. Can you see we have done add mapping, we have done allowed origin patterns, right? And allowed methods. All of these things we have done. Okay. Cool. Now we have to add a few more things. First, I'll bring all of this in a new line. We have to add dot add, sorry, not add, dot allow credentials to be true. Okay, we will say dot allow credentials to be true. What is this credentials? These credentials are actually the part where if you carefully see in the browser, there is a pre-flight request. Can you see? There is a pre-flight request. If you read about pre-flight request CORS, okay, it's a request that is actually sent directly by the browser. If you carefully see what it does is, then it actually checks whether all the security patterns and what do you say, all the security measures are there or not to send secure kind of an information altogether. Because if you carefully see, then we will be actually handling some HTTP only cookie or some kind of a secure code altogether, right? So pre-flight request is part of the modern browser that actually checks, or it is done by the browser to determine if it can safely send the request or not. Are you able to get this point? Okay. So we have to do all of these configurations properly. So this allow credentials is not, was not there already. So that's why browser is not able to directly send it. Like browser was able to send it, like, but from React app, if you try to send, it will not work. Let's refresh once and try again. If I send it, can you see there is still a same error coming up once again? Sorry, server is not up. Let's turn off the server very quickly and let's refresh by that time and send it again. Sign in. And can you see this time it worked? Can you see this time it worked? Both of the requests worked. And do you see we are able to access the JWT token as well here? If I copy the token, go to jwt.io to just check if we have a right token or not. Can you see this is our token? Yes or no? Okay. Now, the moment I make my HTTP only cookie, auth controller to true. Now we want to send an HTTP only cookie. If I restart the server and if I refresh here, you can see I'm not making any change to the client side code. If I try to sign in again, can you see it says no token found? Are you able to get this point? So if we have a HTTP only cookie, we are not able to access it on the client side. If we have a non-HTTP only cookie, we are able to access it. And can you see we have just written the same logic, document.cookie.split, all of that. And then we are able to find that particular thing. Is this point making sense? Okay. And if I just quickly make it false again in front of you and restart and just refresh, sign in, you can see we are able to get the cookie altogether. Okay. If you do document.cookie, okay, then you can see in the document.cookie also we are able to get the JWT token. Can you see? We are able to get the JWT token if you send a proper form request and everything. But the moment I make it true again, and send it, refresh. And if I do document.cookie, one second. Oh, did I not send the request? One second. Refresh. This is up. Let's send it again. Sign in. No cookie found. If I say document.cookie, can you see the document.cookie is altogether empty? Make sense? And even if you see the network request, in the network request, can you see we have the JWT token, but it is now HTTP only. So from browser JavaScript, we are not able to access it. Can I say that? From the browser JavaScript, we are not able to access it. I can just quickly share you guys this code so that you guys can also read it. React is not that difficult. At least this bare minimum code is not that difficult. I'll just push it on GitHub so that you guys can also watch it. Like if you guys want to play with it, do anything around it. Okay, you can do that. You can say HTTP only demo React. Copy, paste. There we go. Refresh, and you can access it from here. Raghav says from DevTools, so will it be an issue? Like DevTools, so you will be able to access when somebody has the access to your laptop. अगर तुम्हारे ब्राउजर का ही एक्सेस मिल गया, तुम बस एक बात बताओ कि अगर तुम्हारे ब्राउजर का ही एक्सेस मिल गया है, तब तो वैसे ही तुम कुछ नहीं कर पाओगे, राइट? मतलब अगर तुम्हारा लैपटॉप ही किसी ने उठा लिया है, तो दैट्स अ डिफरेंट काइंड ऑफ अ थिंग ना. HTTP only cookie allows to make sure that JavaScript is not able to read the cookie. Is this point making sense? मतलब उस केस में तो मतलब क्या ही कर सकते हैं, अगर तुम्हारा ब्राउजर ही कोई लेके बैठा है और तुम्हारी नेटवर्क रिक्वेस्ट खुली हुई है और वहां पे उसको सब दिख गया एंड बूम डन, फिर तो कुछ कर ही नहीं सकते, राइट? Anybody having any questions with the JWT token demo? Anyone with any questions, guys? Are you able to understand like why I was again and again saying that JWT token is not going to be accessible through your browser? No questions from anyone, guys? किसी को कुछ रिएक्ट वाले पार्ट पे पूछना है तो पूछ लो, कोई दिक्कत नहीं है. Will it have effect on browser side? Only effect on what? I didn't get your question. What do you mean by only effect on browser side? What do you mean by only effect on browser side? I didn't get your question. Like in Postman also, if you remember, if you carefully remember, then in Postman also there was an option where we were able to see, right, that whether it's an HTTP only cookie or not. Remember? Yeah, so from Postman also you can access it. For example, if you make a sign-in request, send it, and if you see the cookies, can you see we have a JWT token, which is non-HTTP only, and if you make it true, restart. Let's see if it is up. Yep, it's up. If you send it again, now you can see you have a HTTP only cookie to do. Make sense? Any questions from anyone? Okay. And can you carefully see? There is a cookies option in the request part as well. If you carefully open it, then can you see there is a JWT token cookie coming up? Can you see there is a JWT token cookie coming up? So from here, whatever request you are going to send, all of those requests is going to have access to the JWT token cookie. If you go to this new request, everywhere you can see passenger sign up everywhere. You can see you have access to a JWT token cookie altogether because it was set in the request response lifecycle already. So from here now, whatever requests you are going to send, those requests are automatically going to have that same cookie that we are going to send from the backend. Okay. So let's start implementing one validation API. Let's start implementing one validation API. I hope this demonstration made sense to most of the people. Okay. Okay. So now let's do one thing. I'll say @get mapping. Okay. We are going to have /validate. Okay. The API that we are going to say is correspondingly going to be /validate. Are you guys able to get this point? Say yes or no in the chat. Because we want to validate if the incoming request has JWT token or not. Okay. And we should say, let's say public response entity. Again, for now, I'll keep it wildcard. I'll say validate. Okay. And here, what do we need? What do we need? We need the access to the HTTP servlet request object. Can I say that? We need the access to the HTTP servlet request object. Yes or no? Guys, can you see this? Okay. Now, the only thing that I'm going to do here is I'll say return new response entity. I'll say, for example, success HTTP status.ok. Cool. Let's quickly just check if we are able to make this request or not. Let's close this front end. Now we do not need this front end. And let's make a new request. Add request. Okay. /auth/validate. /auth/validate. Okay. Cool. Now we have to allow this particular route as well, right? In the Spring Security. So if you go in the Spring Security, here, we should say dot request matchers to /API/v1/auth/validate. This API should also permit all. This should also be permitted. Make sense? Okay, cool. Let's restart. And in the validate API, first of all, what we should do is we should first of all sign in. Okay, let's have a fresh sign in. In the auth controller, you can see we have a HTTP only cookie to true. Let's sign in, send it. And you can see we have an HTTP only cookie. At last, it is having something like GTK. Okay. If you go here to the new request, if you go to the cookies, can you see we have the same HTTP only cookie? Can I say that? Okay. And now, if I send the request, you can see we are getting success. So we are able to hit the API. Now inside this API, what I will do is, there's a method called as request.getCookies. Okay, request.getCookies, which is going to give you a array of cookies. Are you able to get this point? Okay, so we can say for cookie in request.getCookies, we are going to access each and every individual cookie object. So there is a cookie object you can see coming from Jakarta.servlet. Okay. And we will say that if, or let's do one thing. Let's say sout cookie.getName. Okay. Plus cookie dot, you can say get value. We'll get the name and the value. Okay. Let's restart the server. So if I send the request, success, and can you see we are having access to a JWT token which is having this particular value. Are you guys able to get this point? Say a yes or no in the chat. Everyone, are able to see that we are able to get access to the cookies inside our request? Anyone with any questions? In multiple methods, we need HTTP servlet request. Does it make sense to have an auto wire to HTTP servlet request and use the same object? Which other method did you use the HTTP servlet request? Abhijit? The above one? No, we didn't. I just gave you an example. We didn't use it here. First thing. I want to get this point. So we were just using HTTP response. Here only, like not every, and can you see, in other request also, I never have it. When you need the request object altogether, then only you're going to use it, right? Sorry, guys. Make sense, everyone? Now, we need to check if the list of cookies is empty. Yeah, those checks I'm going to do. But of course, I was just showing that whether the cookie is coming up or not. Make sense? Okay. Now just think about it. We had an architecture where client is going to send a request, and inside this request, this JWT token is going to be present inside the request cookie. This will be sent to the booking service. Booking service will forward this cookie to the auth service altogether. Can I say that? The same request object booking service will also receive, and then booking service will fetch that cookie if there is, and then forward it to the auth service altogether. Are you able to get this point? Okay. Now, if you remember, we talked about roles. We talked about roles. If you want to set a role to a particular client, then role-based auth is going to be directly done by the auth service. Can I say that? All the role-based APIs that add role, remove role are going to directly exist in the auth service, right? So there, the APIs might be something like this: /API /v1/auth/add role, something like this. Okay. Now, when you will hit this API is also present in the auth service. And then the other API /API/v1/auth/validate. This API is also present in the auth service. Can I say that? So are you going to make an API request from the same service to itself? Are you able to get the point what I'm trying to say? The validate API and add role API, both of the APIs are now present in the auth service only. If now you want to validate whether add role can work or not, whether the user is authenticated or not, then will you make an API request from same service to the same service? Is that what you're going to do? Akash says function call. Yes, function call can work, but can we do something more graceful? Okay. So what we can actually do is in Spring Boot, if you're using Spring Security, let's say if you have a request coming, what you can do is you can actually intercept that request. And as far as I know, there are two mechanisms. There is one thing, something called as interceptor, and there is one thing called as filters. Let's read about both of these things. Okay. Interceptors in Spring Security. Can you see? A Spring Interceptor is a class that either extends this class or this class. Okay. And if you go here, can you see? Spring Interceptor are used to intercept client requests and process them. Sometimes we want to intercept the HTTP request and do some processing before handling it over the controller methods. That's when you use the interceptors. Are you guys able to get this point? Say yes or no in the chat. So let's say you have a controller method like this. What you can do is you can set up an interceptor, which can actually have a pre-handle, post-handle kind of methods that what should happen before a particular request. Okay. And then you can actually configure it here. Apart from this, there is something called as filters. Filters in Spring Boot. Okay. You can see we have something called as filters, which works something like this. Let me actually show you. Spring security. Okay. Filters. Okay. Can you see there is something called as Spring security filters as well? Okay. If you want to actually intercept and request, you can also use filters in your corresponding application. Both of the mechanisms actually work. Okay. What we can actually do is we can filter the request. We can actually do this thing that any request that is going to come, let's come back. Okay. Any request that is actually going to come to the auth service. Okay. Whether it comes to /validate or it comes to /add rules, anywhere, any request that comes up, we are going to intercept that maybe using some filters. Inside these filters, we can have a check that whether you have a cookie or not, right? If you have a cookie, then what is the value of that cookie? If you have a value of the cookie, then what is the user associated to that cookie? Do you have a valid user associated to that cookie? If yes, then only you will forward the request. Then only you are going to forward the request to /validate and /add rule. If the request got forwarded to these APIs, that means the user is authenticated. Otherwise, the user is not authenticated. How many of you guys are able to get this point? Say yes or no in the chat. How many of you guys are able to get this point? Say yes or no in the chat, guys. Okay. So let's try to have them. Let's try to make one. Let's try to make one and see what can be actually done. Okay. So if you are, again, coming from the world of maybe MERN stack, then it is kind of like very similar to that of middlewares. Make sense? Okay, middlewares are also kind of like intercepting requests in between, and you can do the processing on those requests altogether. Okay. So let's do that. So again, we'll come to, let's say, configurations. Or let's not have configurations. Let's have a new package, filters. You can have multiple filters as well. Okay. I will add a Java class and I'll call it as JWT auth filter. JWT auth filter. And this is going to extend something called as once per request filter. What is once per request filter? This particular class actually makes sure that this filter is executed one time for every request, once per request filter. Okay. And it expects you to implement a bunch of methods, which is do filter internal. Are you guys able to see this? You have to override this method, do filter internal. And interestingly, can you see the arguments? It has the request object, response object, and something called as the filter chain. Are you able to get this point? What filter chain is? Filter chain is kind of like the next filter in line. So you can have multiple filters coming up. You can have filter number 1, filter number 2, filter number 3, and all of these filters can actually intercept your request. So more or less how it looks like is that, let's say this is your controller. Okay. Let's say this is your controller. Before your controller, you have, let's say, . filter number 2, filter 2. Okay. Then let's say before filter 2, you have filter 1, filter 1, and before filter 1, you have client. Before filter 1, you have client. So client makes a request. Client actually makes a request. This request, first of all, is collected by filter number 1. Filter number 1 forwards this request to filter number 2. Filter number 2 forwards this request to this particular controller altogether. Okay. So this comes up here, then this comes up here, then this comes up here. Make sense, everyone? So this filter chain actually has access to the next particular filter. Are you able to get this point? Okay, cool. So here we can write our cookie fetching logic. We can write our cookie fetching logic here, that if the request dot get cookies is not equal to null, that means the request has some cookies. First of all, if the request has some cookies, we'll process those cookies. We'll say cookie in request dot get cookies, same to same thing. Okay, and we will check if the cookie dot get name dot equals JWT token. Okay, this will be the token, or this will be the cookie that you are going to send. So if any of the cookie has this property, what we can actually do is we can say string token initially equals to null, and we will say token is equals to cookie dot get value. Make sense, everyone? So if you have cookies, and among those cookies, there is a cookie with the name JWT token, we are going to set its value to this particular token variable. Are you able to get this point? Okay. And now we are going to check. We are going to check that, let's say if token is equals to null, that means user has not provided any JWT token, hence request should not go forward. Are you guys able to get this point? The user has not provided any JWT token. In that case, what should happen, guys? What should happen? The request should not move forward. Yes or no? Everyone, is this point making sense? So let's say what we are going to do is from here, we'll come back to this, that how can we handle the case where the user has not provided the token. But if the if check is not executed, that means the token is actually present. That means the token is actually present. Can I say that? Okay. If the token is present, then in that token, if you remember, let's see our token. Cookies. This is our token, right? If you remember, in the token, we have access to the email. Can I say that? So if I go to jwt.io, okay, then you have access to the sub, which is the corresponding email. Can I say that? So if you come up to your JWT service, there was a method that we wrote, extract email. Remember, we wrote a method extract email. So we can pass the token, and from that token, it will use the subject to extract the email altogether. Can I say that? So let's do that. Okay. Also, one more thing that we can do is we can mark this class as component. Okay, so that Spring Boot manages it. And we can say JWT. Okay, it's not showing the recommendation, so we'll just write everything. Private final JWT service of type JWT service. Okay, and we'll say public JWT auth filter. We'll get JWT service, JWT service. This dot JWT service is equals to JWT service. I'll do the injection. And I believe JWT service is also marked as service. Yes, that's correct. So now what we can do is we can say string email is equals to JWT dot extract email, and we'll pass the token. Can I say that? Now we have access to the corresponding token. Yes or no, guys? And from the token, we have access to the email. Now from this email, what we should do? We should check, right, whether there exists a user with this corresponding email or not. Yes or no, everyone? And apart from that, we should also call our validate token method. Remember, what was the validate token method doing? It was checking that whether the user email fetched from the token is equal to the incoming user details or not, and whether the token has expired or not. Are you able to get this point? Okay. So let's try to do that. So we'll say that if email is not equal to null, if email is not equal to null, we need user details. Remember, who gives this user details object, guys? Who gives this user details class for us to implement? Spring Security, right? User details is equals to. We need to auto wire the user details service. Private user details service implementation, I guess we have to use. Yes. User details service. And here we'll do user details service dot load user by username, and we will pass the email. Can I say that? Can I say that? And we will say that if JWT service dot validate token, we are going to pass two parameters to this validate token method. What are the two parameters? If I come up here, one is the token, and one is the email. Okay. So we'll say token comma, where should we have the email? We have the email inside user details dot get username, because remember the username property we had as the email only. Can I say that? Validity is also based on the expiry, right, Rajat? We are also checking the expiry here, not just the name, but the expiry as well. Okay. Cool. Now, so if the token is validated, then what we should do is, if you see Spring Security, and let me actually show you one thing. Okay. So if you remember our auth controller, then do you remember we actually created this object, username password authentication token? This object. Remember? What was this object going to do? Do you guys remember that? What was this object going to do? This object was able to fetch us that whether the user has a successful login or not. Yes or no? Whether the user has a successful login or not. Can I say that? Okay. So what Spring Security says is that, you can create this token object again. That is, and again, you can have a custom implementation as well. Absolutely no problem. You can have a custom implementation as well, or you can say username password authentication token. Okay. And before we make it, let's also read a few more things about it. Okay. So that you guys have more clarity. Okay. You can say that it's an authentication implementation that is designed for simple presentation of username and password. Okay. Need explanation of this usage in Java application for authentication. So this authentication implementation has two constructor options. These are the two construction options. The first one is used to carry authentication data obtained in the request to be authenticated by authentication provider. Remember, we have multiple authentication providers, and what we were using, DAO authentication provider. Okay. So what it does is the first parameter takes the principal and takes the credentials. Okay. And just uses this principal, which is in our case, email and then password, and then uses our authentication provider to do the authentication altogether. Make sense? The second one has 3 arguments. And can you see what is the third argument? Authorities. Can I say that? Okay. So if you want to have an authentication, we are not just username and password you are checking, but you are also checking that whether the user has a particular role or not. We'll come to the roles part, but if the user has a particular roles or not, then also you can actually use this particular constructor. So in a nutshell, what it is actually doing is it will actually help you to avoid any kind of a self-implementation. Because just think about it. There can be 2 types of authentication. One authentication is a plain authentication that, okay, any user can have access to this. Any user who has successfully logged in and has a successful JWT token has access to this resource. Other type of an authentication can be any user who has a valid JWT token and a particular role is only able to access this. Are you able to get this point? Are you able to get this point, guys? Okay. So both of the things, this particular constructor will automatically sort for you. Otherwise, you have to write the implementation for role checking as well, JWT checking as well. Everything you have to write yourself. But what it does is it just checks all of the details for you automatically. Make sense? Okay. So we will say this token is equals to, and we can create a new username and password authentication token object. So we can say new username password, sorry, user name password. And the first property we can pass is user details. Second property we can pass as null because we have already authenticated. We just want to make sure that this thing is accessible. And currently I do not have any authorities in my user details. If you remember, if you go to auth passenger details, I do not have any authorities property. When we will implement authorization, we will have authorities properties as well. Then you can use the second constructor. And you have this particular object with you. Anybody having any questions why we are creating this object? Because again, the same thing. Creation of this object is going to make sure that you do not have to write a logic that whether this user is a valid user or not, so on and so forth. All of that logic has been already implemented and will be directly used. Make sense? Guys, time for questions. We can just take 2 parts of incoming token and using secret key, generate third part and compare it with the incoming token. Yes, like all of that validation you can do yourself. That's correct. That's why I mentioned it in the last class only. Whatever we are doing, you can do it manually yourself without any problem. It's just that if you don't want to make all of that manual effort, then you have the case of all of these kind of Spring security techniques. Make sense? Cool. Now you can say username password authentication token dot, there is an option called as set details in which you can set the user details object. Okay. You can set the user details object, or if you want to make it more secure, there is one more object that it provides called as new web authentication detail source dot build details, and you can pass request. So let's read about this web authentication detail source, Spring Security. Okay, so again, these are just individual classes that is just doing some particular task. So you can see what is the use case of web authentication detail source. It has a single responsibility to convert the instance of the request into the web authentication details class. You can think of it of a simple converter. This request object, which represents the parsed raw HTTP data, is a standard Java class input. And this is an internal Spring class. Therefore, you can think it as of a bridge between servlet class and Spring class. Okay. So what you can say is that whatever is the incoming request object, it is going to convert that request object in a Spring Boot compatible request object. Are you guys able to get this point? Are you guys able to get this point? Say yes or no in the chat. Okay. And then, and you will realize it in a moment why we want to set all of these things in Spring Security. You will realize that in a moment. And at last, what you can do is there is something called a security context holder. You can say dot get context dot set authentication, and you can pass the authentication token. Okay. Now, this is to make sure that this particular authentication token is actually remembered by Spring Security context holder. Now you might be thinking, why we want to do all of this? Why we want to do all of this effort? Because now what will happen is this particular filter that we have prepared, we can actually attach this filter to any of the request. We can attach this filter to any of the corresponding request. And then all of the requests will be automatically mapped by this particular filter. Are you able to get this point? Are you guys able to get this point? Say yes or no in the chat, guys. Okay. And throughout the life cycle of the request, at any point of time, if you want to check that whether the user is authenticated or not, or what are the user details, you can get that. Otherwise, just think about it. If there is a controller method and then there are particular chain of request methods, right? If you have to check whether the user is authenticated or not, and if it yes, then what are the user details? Then what will you do? You will manually pass it to all of the functions, right? Can I say that? Just answer this question, everyone. You will manually pass it everywhere. And how will you pass it? In the form of what? In the form of DTO. Very good, Rajat. Very good. Guys, if you do not have this logic, that if you're not asking Spring Security to maintain or remember the user details, then you have to remember the user details yourself in the form of a DTO. Can I say that? Can I say that? And then you will be passing that DTO everywhere. Are you guys able to get this point? Guys, these are some very crucial steps. Otherwise, a simple thing for me could have been, I could have just copy pasted this code from the internet and said that, okay, this is a configuration code. But now we are going line by line. Like, why do we want to make sure that the Spring Security context remembers this particular token? Because this particular token has access to the user details object. And we want to make sure that Spring Security remembers that so that we can access it anywhere, anytime. Are you able to get this point? Okay. And then later in any particular constructor, what you will be able to do is any constructor, you will be able to do something like this. Security context holder dot get context dot get authentication. And this is going to return you an authentication object. Okay. And on that, you can check is authenticated, that whether the user is authenticated or not. And if the user is authenticated, then you can also do dot get principal. Remember these methods, dot get principal. And what is inside the principal? Your user details object. That's the first parameter, right? The principal. We saw the constructor definition, remember? Let's see the constructor definition again. Copy. We just saw two constructors, right? And what was the parameter? Principal. Remember? So you will be able to access this user details object throughout your Spring, I would say Spring Boot API anywhere, anytime using this Spring Security context folder. Are you able to get this point? Just think about it. Like most of the time, people will just say that, okay, this is a configuration method, just copy paste that. But now we are going line by line, that what is happening in each particular line. Are you able to get this point? And again, as I mentioned, you can do it manually, but then you have to manually pass your DTO and everything everywhere. Okay. Okay. Any questions, anyone? Any questions, anyone? I don't want to move forward until unless you have any, like, until unless all the questions are answered. Because this thing I know is overwhelming for a lot of people. We say JWT token is stateless, but we are querying database to get email to validate the token. When you say stateless, that means that you are not storing the JWT token on the backend. JWT token possess some email. You are fetching the fact that whether that email is in the backend or not. You never store the JWT token in the backend. If you want to set up sessions, then you can store this token. Then it will not be stateless. I'm lost because I didn't second Spring Security class. I have to cover it. I would say it has not too much related to the last class, Abhijit. Okay, let's do one thing. Tell me, Abhijit, which particular line you are facing difficulty with? You can tell me a range of the line number, and then I'll help you. Because I don't think if you have not attended the last class, you can't understand this. Because just think about it like this. Validation is an independent process. What we discussed in the last class was JWT creation altogether. Okay. If valid, which part, like which line number you are actually facing issues with? 54, 55. Okay. 55 is important. Why? Because just think about it. This is some object. This is an object of username password authentication token. This object contains this user details object. This user details object has access to your email and other properties. Okay. We want to make sure that Spring Security context holder stores it. Why? Because if you will not, if Spring Security context holder will not store it, then who will store it? We will have to store it manually. If we have to store it manually, then we will be passing it to the controller methods using DTOs. And then we have to manage those DTOs automatically ourselves. Can I say that? Can I say that? Say yes or no in the chat, Abhijit. So that's why. And if you will do this, then at any point of time, you can, like in the request, you can do security context holder dot get context dot get authentication, and you will get this particular object back. Okay. Could you please one show validate token? Sure. Where is the validate token? I'm sorry, let's expand it up. Okay, what happened? Why is the window not expanding? Okay, just a second. Okay, this is the validate token method. This is the validate token method. Anybody else having any questions? Okay, cool. In that case, we have the JWT auth filter ready. Now just think about it. Now let's come back. If the token was null, what do you want to do? You want to return from this method because you don't want to process the request further. And before that, you can say response dot set status to HTTP servlet response dot unauthorized. Okay, so this is an HTTP servlet response. This is not your response entity, right? So here, if you want to set a response code, you have to use the HTTP servlet response enum, and you can say unauthorized, and you can just return. Are you able to get this part? And if the email is not null, then you are going to follow all of this. Then you are going to follow all of this. Can I say that? Okay. Then you are going to follow all of. You can also throw unauthorized, no problem there. Okay, you are going to follow all of this. And once all of this is done, then what we are going to do is we are going to make sure that our next method in the filter chain should be called. Can I say that? So I will say filter chain dot. If you want to call the next method, you call the do filter method. And you can just pass the request object and the response object altogether. Make sense? It's very similar to your middleware's next functions. If you are coming from OneStack world, just to, if you are coming and you want to relate with that, you are going to call the next method altogether. Got it? Okay, coming back, if you go to your Spring Security, now inside Spring Security filter chain, what we are going to do is we are going to do a few things. Now, we authorized a few requests. Can I say that? Now we can say that dot, you can say dot authorize. No, we don't want to authorize specific. We can say that dot authentication provider. Remember, we created this authentication provider. We can set this authentication provider here so that this starts working up. And we can say dot add filter before. Add filter before. Okay. Which filter do you want to add here? JWT auth filter you want to add here. Can I say that? So I'll say @autowired private JWT filter, and we will set JWT auth filter. Make sense, everyone? Okay. And can you see it? It is throwing an error. Why? Because it expects 2 arguments. So if you see this particular method, this method expects 1 filter object and 1 before filter object. So this filter object that you provided, and what you are going to do is you are going to provide 1 more filter, which is the username password authentication filter dot class. Now let me show you what is this username password authentication filter. If you go back, can you see there was a username password authentication token corresponding to this class only? There is a username password authentication filter class. Okay. What is the use of this class? This process and authentication form submission. Okay. This process authentication form submission. You can see that here. And if you go up here, or let's see, let's just write use case. Okay. You can see authentication filter. It tries to find a username and password. And in our case, username and password will be email password, request parameter, body. And if it found, then it tries to authenticate the user. Are you able to get this point? So all of these things we are going to actually configure altogether. Make sense? And then ideally, if there is a JWT token and if it is coming from a valid user, when we are going to hit the validate API, when we are going to hit the validate API, then what's going to happen? Anyone? We will be having already the access to the corresponding cookie. Yes or no? Everyone. We will be having access to the corresponding cookie already, right? But do you see an issue? Do you see an issue? We have given permit all to validate. Should we give permit all to validate? No, because for validate to work, the user should be authenticated. Can I say that? Can I say that? Okay. So we are going to remove it from here. We are going to remove it from here. And we can say dot authorize HTTP request, right? And we can pass the auth object again. And we can say auth dot, let's copy paste it here. Not this, let's say auth dot request matchers slash API slash v1 slash auth slash validate. Okay, so the validate API should be dot authenticated. Should be authenticated. Are you guys able to get this point? Right? So now if you are going to send a request, let's run the server. Now you can see I'm only permitting sign up and sign in request. If somebody wants to access the validate request, then they have to technically sign in themselves. So now if you technically send a request here, okay, you can see you're getting 403 forbidden. Yes or no? Because now it needs authentication altogether. Getting my point, guys? It needs authentication altogether. It's now no more the part of permit all. It's now no more the part of permit all. Okay, cool. Now let's see. Do you have a cookie? See, we have a cookie here. Then let's come to the JWT auth filter and see if the filter is working or not. So if we found the token, let's print the token here. So I'll say S out incoming token, incoming token as token. Okay, sorry, it should be a plus. Incoming token as a token. And from that token, when we found an email, then incoming email as email. Okay, let's print all of both of these things. Let's see if the filter is working for us or not. Okay, let's rerun the code. Send it. Okay, can you see we are getting the email and the token? We are able to fetch the email and the token, guys. Everyone say yes or no in the chat. Everyone, see, we are able to get an email and the token, right? Okay, let's see whether we are able to hit the validate API or not. So I'll say S out inside validate controller, validate controller. If I send the request, let's restart. If I send the request again, can you see it's not hitting the controller? Somehow it's not hitting the controller. Can I say that? So if it is not hitting the controller, then probably the issue is inside Spring Security configuration. So let's see how can we configure it properly. Okay. And okay, I got it. So let's cut it out from here. One second. Let's do one thing. Let's make it multi-line already from here. Now for the validated request, we want it to be authenticated and we want to add filter for this. Okay. One second. Let's see what all properties it is giving us. Okay, so they have changed the API here as well, I guess. Da da da. Why the dot and is not working? So dot and. Okay, let's see what does the error says. It has been marked for removal. Okay. In 6.1. So let's see. So what we have to do is we have to attach this filter, I guess, directly here. Okay. So let's see. How can we do that? If I say dot authenticated, we have an auth object. And we say auth dot. Let's quickly Google it. Add filter before for Spring Boot, for Spring Security 6.1. Let's see how they do it. Add filter before Spring Security 6.1 and above. Okay. So let's see. How do you do it? Okay, you have to separately do it, I guess. HTTP.add filter before, okay. Dot authentication provider, this dot any request dot authenticated, okay. We should say, okay, not just validate, I'll say all the remaining request dot authenticated, or let's just for the time do for validate, we'll later I'll remove it. Dot authenticated, okay. And let's see, authentication provider we have given. Authentication provider we have given. And add filter before we have also given. But this should work. Filter not calling controller. Spring Security 6.1. Let's see why it's not calling the controller. We have a filter. Let's quickly check. Let's see. So we have authorized request. Let's see for filters only. Add filter. Let's see how they have added filter. One second. Let's just check for this filter. Copy. They have not configured it. Just a second, guys. Let me just check why this filter is not calling. Let's see. Let's do one more thing. Let's come to this filter and let's have a log here as well. Forwarding request. Okay, let's try to run it again and let's see if it forwards the request or not. Let's send the request. It is forwarding the request. We are calling filter chain.doFilter. That is good. Okay, let's do one thing first of all. Let's say we do not send the cookie. Let's say we do not send the JWT token. Okay. If I send it now, oh, sorry, server is not working. So let's restart. If the token is not there, send it. You can see we get 401 unauthorized. Can I say that? This is working for us. This part of the code is working for us. We are getting 401 unauthorized. Okay. Let's get a token. Send it. Oh, okay, cool. Now the other requests are also getting unauthorized. Can you guys see? All the requests are getting unauthorized. This is probably because it is actually applying the filter before these as well. Okay. How can we resolve this? So do you see what is the issue going on? This JWT filter is being applied on these requests as well. Are you able to get this point? Ideally, it should be only applied to this particular request. Everyone is able to, are you guys able to see this? Same issue happened with interceptor. Yeah, actually problem is Spring Security has changed a lot after 6.1. So let me see, how can we actually modify this? Because the setup is pretty straightforward. Add filter after. That then it will actually start adding the filter after the request, like when the response is going to come up. So let's see. What can we do here? We have a dot authenticated method. If before the authenticated method we do dot doesn't work like this. Uh yeah, Spring Security is a difficult, like it's not difficult to be very honest. It has a lot of configuration. If you want, you can implement everything yourself. Then there will be a lot of logic that you have to write yourself. It's kind of like that. Let's see. Permit all. If we are permitting everything, let's just quickly check. Let's just quickly check if we have any docs. Spring Security 6.1 and above. Let's see if we have a DigitalOcean article. This is quite old. But still, let's see. Web security. Da-da-da. Okay. How to configure filters for only selected requests. Spring Security. Okay. Okay. This is the method. This is the question that we are looking for. So my filter extend this request matcher. Okay, can you see here they're asking to write a custom request matcher. Are you able to get this point? So let's keep this one in mind. And let's see. Authorize this request, this dot any request dot authenticated. Okay. Let's see, how do you configure the filters? Let's see, add filter before tenant filter, this. Okay, I guess we have to add that particular logic, I guess. Let's read more comments. Let's read more comments from here. Okay. Okay, so I guess this is something that you can do. You can make a request matcher object. Can you see here? A request matcher object that is going to match a particular type of a request. And if the request doesn't match, then you're going to return here from here. So let's see. So there should be a method should not filter. Let's see if we have a method should not filter. Do filter and skip dispatch. Is async started? Can you see there is a method should not filter here? This can be overridden in subclass for custom filtering control. Let's try to do that. Ankan. So Ankan is suggesting before you override that method, instead of this, how about you say dot, let's check the syntax very quickly. There is something called as ignore request matcher. Okay. Ignore request matcher. Let's see how do you add that. This dot ignoring request and matchers. So let's copy this. Okay, so Ankan has shared an article. Let's see what this is suggesting. So this says we have added request matchers dot permitted, authenticated, thus this dot permit all. Okay. And you can see they have also implemented a filter. We have implemented a filter. And what they're suggesting is to add a filter. Ignoring these requests. This one, I guess. Okay, let's try it out. Let's try it out from CSRF token, right? So where is the request handler coming from? Okay, so we have to make a custom request handler dot ignoring request matcher slash contact slash this. Okay, let's try it out. One question that I have is the ignoring request matchers only available in the CSRF? Okay. So we are disabling it, right? Then we will not be able to disable it. I believe a more straightforward way should be this. More straightforward way should be this. This one should not filter. If you do not match this particular request. Okay. I believe this should be a more straightforward way. Currently, it's just returning false, right? If you carefully see, they have already provided it to us. If you go here, they have already provided this method to us. Should not filter. It can be overridden in subclass for custom filtering control, returning true to avoid filtering of the given request. If you will return true, then it will avoid filtering of the given request. Are you able to get this point? So what we can say here is that let's create a request matcher object. So let's have it here. Okay, let's import the request matcher and path request matcher. Let's see. Okay. HTTP method. We don't want get, we want post. Okay. Slash API slash v1 slash and one more thing. How many matches we can have? Let's copy this from here. Paste it here. Okay. What is this negated request matcher? It's going to check if it is the request is not matching to this one. Okay. So that's a negated request matcher. And let's do one thing, slash API slash v1 slash auth slash, let's say sign in slash star. Okay, let's take this. Let's take this. Okay. And then what it does is it takes the URI matcher. It creates a matcher object and then it checks whether the incoming request matches this or not. Okay. Let's try it out. Let's try to run it. And let's try to send a sign-in request. Once again, instead of negated request matcher, let's make a request matcher only. Let's take this matcher, URI matcher dot matches. Okay, let's not make a negated one. Send it. Okay, now can you see it is working? Now can you see it is working? So what I can do is, we only want to do it with validate, right? We only want to do it with validate. So we are going to make a negated request matcher for /auth/validate. Okay. Now if you will run it, then both sign up and sign in request will work, because it is going to check that whether you have a /validate or not. If you're not having a /validate, then it will not apply the filter altogether. If you send it, can you see success true is coming up for sign in, and sign up is also working as well. Can you guys see this? So this particular overriding you have to do. This is a new method that is coming up here for us. Okay. So now our sign in function is working properly. Are you guys able to get this point? Sign in and sign up is working properly. Everyone. And again, how did we figure out? We checked the docs. Because Spring Security has changed so much since the version 4 to version 6 that you might have to check the docs at a lot of times. So you can see, should not filter method should be there. If this method will return true, then what will happen is you are not going to apply the filter. Otherwise, you are going to apply the filter. So now what we have associated is that if there is a /validate request, then only we are going to apply this filter. Otherwise, we are not going to apply this filter. Okay. Now let's come back. Let's sign in very quickly. One second, let's send it again. Okay. Which request we are making now? One second, let's restart. Something happened like this. Just a minute. Did I made some changes? Okay, let's try to sign in. Okay, one second. What happened? What's the need of validate? Where exactly? /validate, because other microservices want to check, right, that whether the user is validated or not. They are going to hit this particular API to check whether they are validated or not. Okay. One second, guys. Like, why this is not working? Request is received. It says request received. Just a second. Okay, sign up is working. Why is sign in not working? Oh, my bad, I guess. I made one more account, I guess, already. So let's make a new account. Let's say sanket@test.com. Send it. Okay. And in the sign in, let's have sanket@test.com. Send it. Now you can see sign in is successful. If you go to cookies, you have a JWT token. Now, if I go to validate, now let's see why validate was not going to the controller. Okay. So at least our sign in and sign up is working. And if you go to validate, okay, then if you go to JWT auth filter, okay. So we are not getting incoming token, right? So this auth filter is not being applied to /validate also. Let's see what is the API. /API/v1/auth/validate. Okay. Oh, sorry, it's a GET request. My bad. It's a GET request. Send it. Guys, it's a GET request. Okay. Yep. Now we are hitting the filter. Can you see? We are hitting the filter. And now we have to just check why this filter chain.do filter is not working. Let's quickly check it. We must be now missing something very, very small. Let's see why this might not be working as intended. Filter chain we have added. That is good. Okay. And let's see. Ta-da. Ankan, were you able to send it from the interceptor? Like, were you able to figure out why the interceptor request was not going? Were you able to like debug that? Mhm. No, I did Ant Matcher and was able to do that somehow. Ant Matcher was working. Which version of Spring Security you were using? Which version of Spring Security you were using? 3.2. Hmm. Yeah, that's the older version, right? Hmm. Okay, okay. Okay, so there is something, there is one more annotation called as pre-authorize. Okay, let's see what is pre-authorize as well. There is something I remember. At the rate secured. You can see when we will introduce roles, then we can have pre-authorized role here. Okay. And let's see why this might not be forwarding the request. Let's see. Filter chain dot do filter not calling the controller. Okay, let's see. Controllers and filters are initialized but not getting called. Okay, so we have a filter here which just does some no logic, just calls filter chain dot do filter, and this is the request mapping. Okay, something similar we have. Your filter map slash start, so your call to index should be this slash index. How do you call index? My index is this. Okay. Hmm. Not great. No great answers as such. Ta-da. Hmm. Okay, let's see once per filter request. Now you can see we have this do filter internal. We call a few things here. We have our own logic that is working, and we call filter chain dot do filter. Okay, it should technically call our, and you can see we are calling should not filter, that is done for us. Okay, and you can see they have also made the controller directly. Interesting. One thing is do filter internal. We have a request object, response object, and a filter chain here. Okay. I guess we have done some mistake in the configuration somewhere. That's why it's not calling our controllers. Let's see. We have the validate method. Let's do one thing. Let's have the response as well. Although this should not be required as such. Send it. It says forwarding request. Let's spend 2 more minutes on this, then maybe we can check it in the next class. Okay, add filter before is working, that's good. Dot do filter. You can see it causes the next filter in the chain to be invoked, or if the calling filter is the last filter in the chain, it causes the resource at the end of the chain to be invoked. Can you see, guys? This technically should call the resource at the end. Filter chain dot do filter not working. Is not moving to the next filter. Okay. Other people also have a similar issue. Nothing specific as such. Okay, what we do is chain dot do filter. Yep, these we are doing the same things. Or let's do one thing. Filter chain dot do filter DigitalOcean. Let's see some DigitalOcean articles if we have. Okay. Do post. Okay, but this is from HTTP server, right? This is the authentication provider. I don't think authentication provider has much to do with it because we are applying the filter. Ideally, the filter is getting applied properly. It's just not calling our final resource method. It should technically call the resource method directly the moment we call filter chain dot do filter. Okay. Okay, let's do one thing in that case. Let's do one thing in that case. Let's not delay this process. Okay, we have most of the things set up for our validate API to work. I'll maybe debug it separately. Something maybe very small we are missing because we have our filter working. If you can carefully see, we have our filter which is just applied on the validate request, and that's what we wanted. Okay, so what I'll do is I'll separately maybe debug this. It might be something very small. If you guys are able to find something, I've pushed the code. This code looks good to me overall. If you guys are able to find something, let me know. Otherwise, I'll also spend some time and debug it. Once I have some finding, I'll share on the group. Otherwise, we'll discuss it in the next class. Okay. We are going to integrate that, Rajat. So Rajat is asking that shouldn't this auth be also handled on the API gateway level? So ideally, yes. So first the request, like I have not introduced API gateway, we'll be using Spring only to set up the API gateway. So ideally what happens is the request comes to the API gateway and then API gateway is first responsible for the authentication and then the request moves forward. We are going to change the architecture correspondingly to that. Are you able to get this point, Rajat? Cool. So let's wrap today's session here, guys. Let's wrap today's session here. Maybe again, something very small we might be missing. Okay. Just check if you guys are able to find something. Okay. No, Abhijit, the Wednesday's class. Okay. So if you are able to find something, let me know. And the next class is going to be on testing. We will continue our discussion on Spring Security from Friday. Okay. So next class is on testing. That's going to be independent of test like Spring Security or most of the things.